Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the digestive system. And in particular, we're going to focus on overviewing the anatomy, getting an idea of how the digestive tract is laid out, and what other organs participate in digestive function so that we can prepare for further discussion on the physiology. So the digestive system is generally classified based upon the structures of the digestive tract and then the accessory organs. The structures of the digestive tract include the mouth, which also includes the teeth and the tongue, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and then rectum and anus. And the accessory organs are the salivary glands, the gallbladder, the liver, and the pancreas. And so we're going to actually sort of work our way down in a superior to inferior fashion. We'll start by talking about the mouth and then move to the pharynx and the esophagus and so on as we discuss the physiology of digestion. And when we get to the stomach and the small intestine, we'll sort of include the gallbladder, the liver, and the pancreas as the organs that sort of pertain directly to those structures. And in a similar way, the salivary glands pertain to the mouth, so we'll do this kind of early on. There are 6 major digestive functions. The digestive functions are 1, ingestion, which basically means the food enters the mouth and the digestive tract. 2, mechanical processing, which is physical manipulation of solid food. 3, digestion, which is the chemical breakdown of food into small organic fragments. So you want to remember that this is, when we talk about organic fragments, we're talking things like proteins become amino acids or lipids become fatty acids. It's important to distinguish digestion from mechanical processing because there is in fact chemical reactions occurring in order to make change to the actual chemicals that are present in the digestive system. 4 is secretion, which is release of water, acids, enzymes, and buffers, and a lot of those are going to come from the accessory organs. 5, absorption, movement of small molecules, electrolytes, vitamins, and water across the digestive lining. This mostly happens in the small intestine. We want to be able to acquire the nutrients from food that we need, which drives the reason why we take food in the first place. And then lastly, number 6, excretion, which is just removal of waste products from the body. And so that will focus sort of in the large intestine and the rectum and the anus. All right, next we're going to discuss and draw the layers of the digestive tract. And when we say digestive tract, we actually really mean the entire length from the esophagus to the anus. So we don't really consider the mouth, even though in the previous setup I had it selected as part of the digestive tract. The structures that we're going to draw here don't particularly pertain to the mouth. So we'll start with the esophagus for this particular drawing. So there are 4 layers of the digestive tract, like 4 main layers: the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, externa, and then serosa. But there's exceptions, of course, and then there's sort of like sub-layers too. So we're just going to draw them a little bit at a time here and sort of see all the pieces. So first we start with the mucosa, which is the inner lining of the digestive tract. So if you think of it as just a hollow tube, the inside is where all of the food, undigested and digested contents are going to be. We could appropriately call that the lumen, just like we would the lumen of the blood vessel or lumen of other cavities. And so the mucosa is basically the lining that is the most inside but is going to contact the lumen. And so we're drawing a viewpoint here that is sort of a cross-section, but doesn't really show the lumen. And so I just want to mention these couple of things right off the bat. So we have a very large peak, which is called a plica. And the plica basically serves to increase the surface area of the inner lining of the digestive tract. And then we also have these little spiny looking things, and those are called villi. And actually when we later on in a later video, we're actually going to sort of do a blow up of what's happening with just the villi. So we'll have more to say about that soon enough. So there are 3 components of the mucosa, and we're going to work our way sort of from the pink to the blue. So from the what would technically be the innermost to the outermost. And so the pink layer, which also makes up the villi, is the mucosal epithelium. And the mucosal epithelium is basically stratified squamous epithelia in the oral cavity, in the pharynx, and the esophagus. And we mentioned that the digestive tract doesn't technically include the mouth, but in terms of the oral cavity and the pharynx, it definitely does have epithelium. And we sort of know that also from, if we consider the respiratory system, we've already sort of addressed the tissue structures that are going to be present there. But it is important to note that also the esophagus, which we said is technically the beginning here, will be consistent with the drawing. And then once we get below the esophagus, we have simple columnar epithelium. So that would basically be the stomach and the large and small intestines. Now, of course, every epithelia has to be connected to a basement membrane, and then we have our connective tissue. The lamina propria is areolar connective tissue, which contains blood vessels, nerve endings, lymphatic vessels. The lymphatic vessels are drawn in green, and we haven't really covered the lymphatic system yet. But the lymphatic vessels play a critical role in digestion and absorption of lipids. So they'll be discussed several times throughout the digestive system lectures. We also have smooth muscle cells, and then we also have secretory cells of the mucus glands. So I've actually drawn them in purple, and so there's a couple varieties here. There are mucus glands that are sitting sort of embedded in the mucosal epithelium that will secrete mucus onto the epithelial surface. And then there are also some that are actually deeper, and they actually are embedded even further down in the submucosa, which we'll see in a moment. And then they just sort of extend a little a duct that will reach the mucosal epithelium and then allow for secretion of mucus. And then just below the lamina propria, we have the Muscularis mucosae. And this is a very thin layer of smooth muscle cells, but it's actually two concentric layers. And so just so we're clear on the terminology, if you don't know, concentric basically means a circle within a circle. Basically, they're, the layers of the digestive tract are, they surround the tube entirely. So it'll be a layer that surrounds the tube and then a layer that's a little bit more external that surrounds the tube also. And so we have two concentric layers of smooth muscle cells. And those are the components of the mucosa. When we move a little bit deeper, and what's interesting is as we draw this picture, we can see that the deeper still, the submucosa extends upwards into the plica. So it's not completely flat yet. The submucosa is a collection of dense, irregular connective tissue that binds the mucosa to the layer that is actually below the submucosa, which is the Muscularis externa. And it also contains blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, nerve fibers, and glands. So the lymphatic vessels all consistently draw in green. Capillaries, blood vessels, obviously red and blue. And then yellow for nerves, which we're only going to talk a little bit about in this section. Deeper than that is the Muscularis externa, and the Muscularis externa, like the Muscularis mucosae, has two concentric layers of smooth muscle cells, and they're specifically named. There's an inner circular layer, which I've drawn by just like what looks like a bunch of beads, and then an outer longitudinal layer, which is more flat. And it's separated, these two layers are separated by sensory motor and interneurons of what we call the enteric nervous system. So the enteric nervous system is sort of the specific nerve fibers that pertain to the digestive tract. And there is some evidence that the enteric nervous system is a little bit autonomic in the same way that the heart is able to function without necessarily having other neural innervation. The enteric nervous system is a little bit able to work independently, and it interacts with the autonomic nervous system as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about the control of the digestive system. Now, the outermost layer is the serosa, and there's a little bit of a qualifier here, but first we'll just sort of remind ourselves of the visceral peritoneum. So the serosa basically covers the Muscularis externa along portions of the digestive tract within the peritoneal cavity. So that means that the serosa is the visceral peritoneum. So those two sort of terms are synonymous. And then as a reminder, anytime that we talk about the serous membranes, we know that there are two layers. There's the visceral and the parietal. So this is going to be the visceral, and then the parietal would basically line the cavity, the peritoneal cavity specifically, right? And then the sort of the space in between them is basically a fluid-filled cavity, which in the case of the peritoneum, we would just refer to that as peritoneal fluid. And we know that the peritoneal fluid, when patients have things like liver failure, kidney failure, and even heart failure, sometimes there can become an excess of fluid in this space, which we call ascites. Now, the other thing I want to sort of remember also is the term mesentery. So the mesentery is basically double sheets of serous membrane that will anchor portions of the digestive tract and then provide a pathway for blood vessels and nerves. So if you remember, the visceral peritoneum is continuous among the different organs or the different components of large and small intestine in the digestive tract. And so the visceral peritoneum is like one continuous sheet, and then the parietal is one continuous sheet, and then they'll meet in certain places, and where they meet, they come together to form the mesentery, and they also sort of house these blood vessels and nerves. And this is a critical point because particularly in elderly patients who become dehydrated, they can have things like mesenteric ischemia. They're not getting enough blood flow to the digestive organs via the mesentery, and actually can cause death of some of those organs. Because they don't get adequate supply. So it's kind of an interesting thing to remember. And then the other point that I want to make here is that the oral cavity, esophagus, and rectum they're not technically in the peritoneal cavity. They're above and below. And so in those cases, the muscularis externa is surrounded by a dense network of collagen fibers called adventitia. So we just refer to it as adventitia when we're outside of the peritoneal cavity, while we refer to it as serosa when we're inside the peritoneal cavity. The last thing I want to sort of remind you about is that some organs, like the pancreas, portions of the small intestine, such as the duodenum, and then portions of the large intestine are technically retroperitoneal, meaning that they sit behind the peritoneal cavity. And so one thing that becomes particularly relevant when we talk about the digestive tract is that for the first time we have a sort of a body system that spans multiple cavities. For example, the esophagus is in the thoracic cavity while the rest of the digestive organs are in the peritoneal cavity, as well as some are sort of retroperitoneal, so they can like poke in and poke out of what we consider to be the cavity. So we're gonna explore that a little bit further as we talk about some of the structures in more detail. So that is our introduction to the digestive system, particularly the digestive tract. And in the next couple of videos, we'll talk a little bit about how digestive materials are moved throughout the digestive tract, as well as how digestive function is controlled. And then we'll move on and talk about some of the specific functions of each organ. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.